Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel. I wish you all a healthy, successful day at work and happiness with your family and loved ones. In this video, I'll be following a girl's journey as she rebuilds her home after her old house burned down. I hope you enjoy the movie and like this video. Mornings in the forest always begin very quietly. There are no car horns, no alarm clocks. Only the sound of dew falling on the leaves, the chirping of young birds, and the faint light filtering through the tall trees, illuminating the small wooden house nestled on the hillside. The young woman, wearing a worn-out cloth jacket and carrying an old bamboo basket, stepped out of the house with her familiar smile. That wooden house was all she owned, built by her own hands many years ago, every wooden post, every plank bearing the imprint of her hands and sweat. She had only intended to go foraging for wild vegetables, as usual. A normal, peaceful morning, with no signs of impending disaster. When she returned, the smell of smoke was the first thing that struck her senses. At first, she thought someone in the forest was burning dry leaves. But then she saw a thin wisp of black smoke rising from the direction of the house. Her heart sank. Her footsteps quickened, her breathing became labored, and the basket of vegetables fell to the ground without her noticing. The house was on fire. Not a raging inferno, but a smouldering fire, creeping through the dry wood, slowly consuming the roof, the walls, the memories she hadn't had a chance to say goodbye to. No one knew why the fire started. There was no cooking, no lightning, no clear traces. Just fire coming and taking everything, silently. As it always did, she screamed for her neighbors. A few people scattered throughout the forest heard her urgent call and rushed over with buckets of water, hose, and anything they could find to help. They put out the fire with their bare hands, with the stream water, with genuine concern for the young woman living alone. The fire finally died down, but the house was gone. Only charred wooden pillars remained, the roof collapsed, and the smell of ash lingered in the air. She stood silently for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. As if any movement would cause everything else to collapse with her. Neighbors comforted her, advising her to rest and stay with them for a few days. She nodded, thanking them, but when they left, she was alone. She began to dismantle the house. Each burnt piece of wood was removed. Each rusty nail was pulled out. Her hands were blackened with ash, but her movements were slow and careful. She didn't throw things away in anger. She dismantled the house as if she were bidding farewell to a loved one. Each piece of wood was set aside. She whispered an apology. Not for letting the house burn down, but because she knew some losses need no reason, and people must learn to move on without explanation. As the sun set, the empty ground appeared, where her home once stood. She sat down, her back against a tree trunk, gazing into the space before her. There were no tears, there was only one very clear feeling: I was still alive. And that was enough to start again. The next morning, the forest awoke as if nothing had happened. Birds still sang, the wind still blew, sunlight still fell in the same places. Only the girl was different. She carried an emptiness in her heart, but also a new life had just begun to sprout. She picked up a hoe and began leveling the ground. No hurry, no blaming fate. Each stroke of the hoe was a breath. The soil, mixed with ash and charcoal, was dry and hard, but beneath the surface was still fertile land. She knew that, just as she knew, beneath the pain, there was still strength. She worked all morning. At noon, she sat down to rest, drank some spring water, and looked at the now leveled ground. For the first time since the fire, she smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who accepted reality. In the afternoon, she took out paper and pen. The new house would not be like the old one. She drew simple lines, a lower roof to ward off straw winds, wider windows to let in sunlight, a higher foundation to prevent dampness. She noted everything, what wood she could get from neighbors, what bamboo she could cut herself, what materials she had to save on. She didn't dream of a beautiful house, she dreamed of a sturdy house. As dusk fell, she stood in the open field, her hands covered in dirt, her eyes gazing up at the crimson sky. She whispered, as if to herself, "It's all right, I'll rebuild, not tomorrow, not quickly. But little by little, with these very hands." In the deep forest, where ashes once lay, a new journey began, not noisy, not ostentatious, but persistent and sincere, like how people learn to rise again after loss. On the third morning after the fire, the forest fog was thicker than usual. The girl woke up very early, before the sunlight even touched the open ground where the old house used to stand. She tied up her hair, put on her faded, sun-weathered coat, and stood still for a long time in front of the leveled area. In her mind, the blueprint for her new house became clearer each day, but to bring those lines to life, she needed wood, lots of wood. She knew that this time she couldn't do it all alone as before. The forest gave her peace, but it also taught her a lesson about limits. One person, no matter how strong, cannot carry an entire forest on their shoulders. She began to go deeper into the forest, looking for long fallen tree trunks, dry logs that were still intact. She didn't cut down living trees. She always believed that building a house shouldn't begin by destroying another life. The logs lay silently beneath the decaying leaves, as if waiting for someone to awaken them. She used a small knife to trim away the rotten parts, marking the sections that could be used for posts and beams. Some sections were too heavy. She just stood there, sighing. Her hands touched the cold, rough wood, and a familiar feeling of helplessness washed over her. In the past, when she built her old house, she had been proud that she didn't need anyone's help. But now, standing before a pile of wood far beyond her strength, she suddenly understood, independence doesn't mean being isolated. That afternoon, she carried a few small pieces of wood and walked to the nearest house in the forest. The elderly neighbor opened the door, looked at her with kind eyes, and didn't ask many questions. She hesitated for a moment, then said what she had always avoided. I need help, if you can, just a simple sentence, but saying it was harder than she thought. As if admitting that she had become weaker, that she needed others. The neighbor nodded, no pity, no curiosity. She simply nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The next day, 2 more people came to help. Some brought axes, some brought saws, and some just brought strength and willingness. They went into the forest with her, pulling heavy logs out from under thick layers of leaves, laughing together when they slipped, and resting by the stream to drink water. She realized she had long forgotten this feeling, the feeling of not being alone. While working, they shared trivial stories. Stories about last year's rainy season, about wild animals destroying the gardens, about houses that had been built and then repaired because of storms. No one mentioned the fire, but everyone knew. The silence wasn't heavy, but like a thin blanket, warm enough to provide shelter. At one point, while pulling a large log, she slipped and fell to the ground. Her clothes were covered in mud, her knees ached. Before she could get up, someone reached out. She grasped it, stood up, her heart pounding from exhaustion, and from a strange feeling, being supported. In the afternoon, the first logs were neatly stacked on the open ground. They were no longer nameless trees in the forest, but had become part of something taking shape. She walked around, touching each log, imagining where they would stand in the new house. Evening came, when everyone had gone home, and she sat alone. Moonlight fell on the pile of wood, creating soft streaks of light. She suddenly realized, this new house wasn't just built of wood and earth, but also of the kindness of the people around her. Something her old house, which she had built entirely with her own hands, never had. She thought about the fire, still no explanation. But for the first time, she wasn't trying to find an answer anymore. Perhaps not everything that happens needs to be understood. Some things just need to be moved on. She placed her hand on her chest, where her heartbeat remained steady. The loss had taken away her old home, but it had also opened another door, a door leading to connection, to learning to trust others, and to believing that she deserved help. In the quiet darkness of the forest, she whispered, "Thank you." She didn't know who she was thanking. Maybe the forest, maybe her neighbors. Or perhaps she should thank herself for not closing her heart after the ashes. Tomorrow, she will begin erecting the first pillars. And this time, she knows, the new house will stand firm not only because of the solid ground, but because her heart has learned to open up. The first rain came on the very day she was erecting the house pillars. Not a torrential downpour, but a persistent, silent jungle rain, falling from morning till night as if it had no intention of stopping. The water seeped into the earth, turning the freshly leveled ground into muddy slush. The logs she had prepared the day before became slippery and incredibly heavy. She stood under the makeshift shelter, watching the rain fall, her heart sinking. There are days when a person's will isn't broken by major events, but by very small, very regular obstacles, repeated until exhaustion. This rain didn't destroy anything obvious, but it slowed everything down, made everything heavier, and made her begin to doubt herself. She still went to work. Her hands were freezing, mud clung to the hems of her trousers, and each step had to be careful. She tried erecting a wooden pillar, but the soft earth couldn't hold it. The pillar tilted, then fell. The dry, sharp sound of wood hitting the ground echoed, a reminder that things weren't as easy as they seemed on paper. She sat down. For the first time since the fire, tears fell. Not loudly, not sobbing, just silently, mingling with the rain. She cried because she was tired, because she was lonely, because she felt like she was trying to climb a slope with no end in sight. Maybe I should just give up, the thought appeared very softly. Not to give up living, but to give up trying. To give up building a house, to give up struggling. Maybe she could stay with someone. Maybe she could accept a temporary life. The thought wasn't bad, just sad. The rain lasted 3 days. During those 3 days, she did very little. Most of the time, she sat watching the forest obscured by a white curtain of water. But it was in those moments of silence that she began to hear her inner voice more clearly. She realized she wasn't weak because she wanted to stop. She was just exhausted, so she allowed herself to rest. She built a small fire under the shelter, cooked a pot of thin porridge, and ate slowly. She revised the blueprint, not to speed up the work, but to make it easier. She added a small line in the corner of the paper, no need to rush. When the rain stopped, her neighbors came over. Seeing her sitting still, they didn't urge her. They only brought some vegetables and roots, set them down, and stayed to help her reinforce the foundation and dig drainage ditches. Things she had never thought of doing, because she was too used to doing things her own way. She learned another thing. Resilience isn't about not falling, but about knowing when to stop so you don't break. The day she re-erected the first pillar, the sky was still overcast. The wooden pillar wasn't perfectly straight, but it stood firm. She placed her hand on it, feeling the solidity of the earth beneath. In that moment, she felt an unusual peace. The house hadn't yet taken shape, but she was different. She no longer thought about rebuilding life as it was before. She only thought about building a life sufficient for the present, one day at a time, one pillar at a time, no more. As evening fell, the rain stopped completely. The late afternoon sun pierced through the clouds, shining on the newly erected pillar, illuminating it against the dark earth. She smiled. Not because all the difficulties were over, but because she knew, even if the rain returned, even if there were more days when she wanted to give up, she had learned to stay true to herself, and that was enough to continue. After days of continuous rain, the forest entered a rare period of tranquility. The mornings became clearer. The sunlight was no longer harsh, just warm enough to dry the ground, gentle enough to ease any sense of urgency. The girl woke up in sync with the forest, not too early, not too late. Everything now unfolded slowly, as if she and the forest had learned to adjust to each other. The house began to take shape. The first wooden post stood firm, forming a rough but sturdy framework. She used rope to tie them together, measuring and re-measuring for a long time before hammering in each nail. Each hammer blow was steady, neither hurried nor hesitant. It was no longer the sound of desperate effort, but the sound of mature perseverance. Some days, she worked alone. Other days, neighbours came to help lay the cross beams and erect the roof. No one stayed too long. They came, did their work, and then left, like small streams contributing water to a large river, silently, but necessary. She began to get used to accepting help without feeling guilty. Before, whenever someone helped her, she always told herself she owed them something. Now, she learned to say thank you and believe that kindness wasn't a debt, but something given to be given again, in some way, at another time. The roof was put up on a breezy afternoon. She stood below, looking up at the stacked planks of wood obscuring the sky. The feeling was both strange and familiar. Not like her old house, but not unfamiliar either. Like another version of herself, still her, but having gone through more. When the four walls were erected, the interior space became clear. She stepped inside, standing in the middle of the empty house, listening to the sound of her footsteps echoing on the new, wooden floor. There was no more smell of ash, no trace of the fire. Only the scent of fresh wood, dry earth, and a very real feeling, she had done it. But what surprised her most wasn't the house, it was herself. She realized she was no longer afraid of the silence. On evenings alone in the unfinished house, with the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, she didn't feel empty. On the contrary, she felt her heart expand. She thought about the days gone by, the day the old house burned down, the day she sat crying in the rain, the day she took someone else's hand to stand up. It all hadn't disappeared, it remained, but it no longer weighed her down. She closed the first wooden door one peaceful morning. The door wasn't completely sealed. There was still a gap for the light to filter in. She did it intentionally. She didn't want a completely closed house. She wanted the sun to come in, the wind to come in, and for change to find its way in. That evening, she lit a fire in her new house. The fire was small, carefully controlled. The flames danced on the wooden walls, warm but no longer frightening. She sat watching the fire for a long time, not letting old memories drag her back to fear. She understood that not all fires bring destruction. Some fires only provide warmth and light. The house wasn't perfect. Some pieces of wood didn't fit together. Some parts of the floor weren't perfectly smooth. But she didn't fix them immediately. She left them as they were, as a reminder that life doesn't need to be perfect to be worth living. When night fell, she lay on the newly built wooden platform, listening to the forest breathing around her. For the first time in a long time, she slept soundly, without dreams. In that sleep, there was no image of the house burning down. Only a house standing strong, in the middle of the forest, and a girl who had grown up without needing to loudly prove it to anyone. The house was completed on a very ordinary morning. There was no celebration, no applause, no declaration that everything was all right. The girl simply woke up, opened the door, and realized there was nothing left to fix urgently. The roof wasn't leaking, the wind wasn't blowing too strongly. The floor was dry enough to place the kettle on without getting wet. The completion came so gently. She swept the house one last time. The ashes of the old house were buried deep beneath the earth, becoming part of the new foundation. She didn't keep any mementos from the fire. Not because she forgot, but because she had taken with her enough of what was necessary in her memories. At noon, she cooked a simple meal. Sitting alone in her new house, she ate slowly. Each bite of rice anchored her to the present. No longer in a hurry to make up for what had been lost. No longer feeling the need to prove she was strong, she was simply living. In the afternoon, a few neighbors stopped by. They looked at the house, nodded, no compliments, no lengthy questions. But in their eyes, she saw reassurance, as if they knew, from now on, she would be all right. She made tea, and everyone sat on the steps. The conversation revolved around small things: the approaching rainy season, the stream being drier than last year, an old tree recently fallen after a strong wind. No one mentioned the fire. There was no need to mention it anymore. By the time everyone left, it was already twilight. She stood on the porch, watching the forest gradually sink into darkness. The new wooden house wasn't brightly lit, only a small fire inside, enough to illuminate the path. She suddenly understood, light doesn't need to be strong to be meaningful, just enough to keep people from getting lost. She thought about those who will eventually lose something: a home, a job, a relationship, or an old version of themselves. Not everyone is forewarned, not everyone receives an explanation. But if one can still stand up, if one can begin with something very small, picking up a piece of wood, leveling a patch of land, accepting to reach out, then the journey of rebirth has already begun. She placed her hand on the wooden door, feeling each grain of wood warm under her hand. This house was not just shelter from the rain and sun. It was proof that people can overcome loss without becoming bitter, can be strong yet gentle, can be independent without being alone. Night fell completely. In the deep forest, a small wooden house stood silently. Not proud, not ostentatious, just enduring, like the girl inside it. And if someone were to pass by, seeing that warm firelight, perhaps they would understand, even without hearing anyone tell them, that this place was once ashes, but what remained in the end was not loss. Rather, it is the ability to start anew, with all the gentleness that humanity can still retain. Thank you for watching the entire video. See you in the next video soon.